So today we have a couple of outside presentations. Jeremy Hill is here, as he is every year, to just give us an overview of the economic situation in the county and the state and the country. And then after that, Sheena and a team from Wichita State are going to talk about, give an overview of the compensation analysis that we are undergoing. This will be the first of a couple of meetings on that topic. And then we have a transportation CIP overview at 11. The 12 to 12:30, if all commissioners, it looks like we have all commissioners here, we might have just a very brief Q&A at the end, but the real discussion for commissioners will be tomorrow at end of day, where we have an hour dedicated just to kind of listen to the commissioners' discussion on any budget concerns that they have going forward. So purpose of the workshop is twofold. One is to just get some outside information from providers, and then the second and most important part is to hear commissioners as we enter into a 2022 budget discussion, hear commissioners' visions and ideas on how they want that budget to shape up. It will help staff begin to formulate the initial draft of the budget. So with that, we'll turn it over to Jeremy, and we'll have the Kansas Economic Outlook.
All right, thank you. What is the time frame here, just to make sure I don't get in trouble with the hall pass? Okay. All right, so I guess technology of people online, they can see the presentation. Are we good?
We're good.
Okay. All right, since I'm further back, is it all right to take off? I mean, you can hear me, but some people might need to see my lips visually, or no?
You can take it off.
All right.
Take it off.
Well, I don't know about all that. I don't think you would want to see anything. So, Kansas Economic Outlook Conference, or Outlook, not conference, but talking about the economy. There's a lot to talk about. My goodness. Am I kind of hot? Is it a little too loud? Okay. There's a lot to talk about. First, start off, is there any things you want to put on the table to bring up in the discussion? How about this? I'm going to introduce, I put a theme to it, and then I'll come back. So think about what you might want to ask or what you want to talk about. I was thinking about the economy. I remember once upon a time we actually went to movies, and it's been a long time you went to a movie theater. I thought, there's something to not just a movie, but a disaster action. Think about a flood, a hurricane, a tsunami. There's some similarities to all those events. And you have these different phases. You have this first phase, or part one, where this is a combo form of the storm, where only this nerdy person who really knows the full impact, but they can't get the information out to the people to tell them how serious it's going to be. That actually happened, right? And we had a discussion, so I'll show you a few slides on that. Then you had the disaster, and because you paid for this movie, it lasts at least an hour and a half, right? So that's kind of how I thought we'd go through some of the steps. But there's some other things you wanted to talk about, or you might want to talk about. Here's last year's, some of the things we had on the list to talk about last year. COVID-19, we did have several slides on it. And by the way, last year when I was doing this, we just didn't have the information, right? The only thing I really had was to think back at SARS and said we had a pretty robust healthcare system and that we might be able to get under control. However, a lot of the information was being held back, so we didn't really know the full impact. So unfortunately, I was being pretty robust about what I thought was going to happen in the economy, but we did talk about the concerns about that and talked about the concerns of a potential recession that might come up. Now, obviously, this has changed and corrected the economy already, so the idea of a recession on top of this is really off the table. We talked about international trade, 737 MAX impact. We talked about quite a bit about retail sales and this impact on government revenue. And then there's some questions about the protective service occupations. And that one I actually looked at wages and cost of living and showed how much protective service wage would be here if it was from Oklahoma City or Kansas City or Topeka, I think, are the markets I showed. That's what we talked about last year. Oh, did I go too far? Oh, maybe I didn't put it on there. I had another slide for things to talk about this year. What do you guys want to throw out here and talk about? I bet it's 2 slides forward. Oh, there it is. Here are the ones that was given to me, but go ahead. Recovery. Yeah, the recovery. What's the post-COVID economy going to look like, particularly how it would affect our core industries, revenue. you can say something on here. I go with the audience. Wherever you guys talk is where I'll go. So, and I got to remember to repeat questions. I just queued that in for those people who are online. I'll try to do that.
I like all of these topics.
So Lindsay said all these topics. I wonder why. But anyone else? Anyone that you really particularly want to hit?
Behavioral health, I love that you have that first. I think that's number one topic on our legislative document.
So for those online, behavioral health was a top one. Oh, am I moving around too much?
No, they're asking to see the screen, so I'm going to try and make that possible.
Okay. So on this, there's quite a few things we could talk about. I'm not sure I'll be able to hit all of them, particularly like the economic impact of crime. I think that's a deeper conversation. However, we have the overall economy and how it affects crime. And so if you interact with us, we might be able to have a little bit more dialogue about how that might impact given what's going on. So I'll trust that you guys be engaged a little bit to get there. This is what I presented last year, right? Here's the Kansas economy back in October. I was giving a reason why it would grow, even though we're getting a tight labor market, I thought it was going to grow. It got adjusted because of 737 MAX, that's at the state level. And here's the Wichita area. We said that 737 MAX was going to really slow down our economy on that. And I was still being bullish, though. I thought, hey, there are fundamental reasons why we should grow, except I was concerned about the COVID. That was our forecast. All right, so let's get into the disaster, right? This one is pretty interesting. How many people have an Android phone? Raise your hand. Thank you. There's not a lot of people in here. Are you guys all Apple then? We have a lot of Apple. I'm actually an Apple too. But thank you guys for you that did this because you gave us some really good information. I think this slide tells us a lot about what has happened in the economy. Because on your phone, they know where you live and they know where you work. And they know all the places that you might go for recreation. And you can see this. This is the change from last year. 0 being the normal day you're going around your business. Increased a little bit in late February. And then all of a sudden, you dropped 50% of your travel dropped immediately when we did the shutdown. So about half of your traveling completely shut down. And you can see for workplaces, it went almost down to, all the way down to 50%. Going to the summer, it came up a little bit, but you're still, down 30% from where you were back in February. So that means about 30% of your traffic has still been reduced. Even though we had spikes in COVID over the summer and into the winter, it didn't affect it. You still stayed low. I think this is interesting because this changes a lot of the parameters going forward as well, right? How much is there going to be demand for going back to that back downtown office versus how many people are going to stay remotely, particularly in our area? Think about the Mays and Goddard and all the demand for housing that got boomed, demand to go further. They wanted bigger lots. They want Texas-sized homes, right? All of a sudden you have that shift. So far, we've been pretty sticky of not really coming back too much. And it's obvious because we haven't really had that herd immunity to really make it safer to come back. But it will come back a little bit. But are we going to get back to 0 of people traveling back to their office? There's no way that's going to come back to 0. Yes?
That red line has 5 negative bumps on it. Can you explain that?
Seasonality, there's different, and if you look at the holidays and things like that where people weren't moving around. Same thing when you get, I don't know the first part of the year, why that biggest bump coming down, why people weren't doing. But you can see the holidays, things like that hitting in. Yep. That must have been still probably, the holiday shut down because it goes into December right there. The biggest drop. So how's that going to affect infrastructure? I mean, here's the thing to think about as a county. You already saw the demand in housing, right? People trying to get the Texas-sized homes and yards and things like that. Is that going to go away? It'd probably go away a little bit, but the demand to build is still going to be there. But people, where are they going to recreate? Where are they going to buy and consume food now if they're not going to as much downtown? How much more infrastructure is it going to require? In the short term, your roads are going to be different, but demand of travel, everything is going to be shifting further and further out of the central city because of this. And the cost of providing those services will likely go up because that infrastructure was built to go into central city and not really to stay around the suburb as much. So we've got some things to think about. All right, here's another one. You heard those hard-hit industries, restaurants, things like that, where they really shuttered down. And this one really takes a good picture over here on the top left. This shows full-service restaurants. right? Not the McDonald's, because all those actually did pretty well there. We're eating lots more McDonald's and Chick-fil-A and things like that. But full-service restaurants dropped completely. And then it came up. It depends on which market, how much they opened, and how much those restaurants were coming up. It is actually helpful to look on the political scale, because you see those who said we're going to open up markets, you can see restaurants came up more. And those who kept their markets closed or had big outbreaks, you kept restaurants down below. So that was a good perspective. Now, how do you look at this and switch this and think about our economy in Kansas? Because we were nighting it out, we had a lot more savings, we consumed a lot more at grocery stores, but that actually benefited Kansas quite a bit. We consumed a lot more grains, and we consumed a lot more comfort foods like Twinkies and frozen pizzas and M&Ms that we all make in this state. And even meat, it just shifted where we were eating the meat. So we're eating actually more beef because we had more income all of a sudden. We had more beef, it just wasn't all the pieces within the cow. So all of a sudden, the state actually benefited a lot from the shift of not going into the restaurant, you're eating home and you're consuming different foods. That actually was a good growth for the state economy. Overall travel, this is TSA, just the first part of the year. So you can see this blue line at the bottom, we're still not even a third of where we were before so far. We're not flying. How does that impact the state? Just because we're in that previous slide and this slide, we're not traveling so much, that actually has put a lot less demand for oil and gas. We're an energy state, and actually we have a lot of the energy infrastructure here. Because of that, the prices of the oil prices remained extremely low. It actually just came up because of the cold weather, up to $62 a barrel for the West Texas. But even the Kansas sweet crude is still really low, lower than we can be feasible. It will probably start to come up a little bit more because of travel will start opening up more. So we should see some pressure on keeping that oil price up. But we're not in a market for Kansas to really benefit from oil and gas for quite a long time. It'll be a couple years before we really recover from this. Oil and gas got hit pretty darn hard. Another one I was extremely concerned about was if you put on a scale of really high concern and high probability is the bankruptcies of businesses, particularly that small business. I thought we're going to have a wave of that. That could have had a big impact on the financial system, and that would have created even a bigger shutdown than some of the COVID would have done. So the first round of PPP loans was effective in the sense that you can see overall, we actually kept companies from really doing a lot of bankruptcies right there at the top. And it actually kept people employed, which put less burden on the system. Second round that we're going through, we're still going to see how effective that one's going to be. And in a third round, not so sure how effective it will be. I actually got some slides at the end to show the effectiveness of some of the federal policies as an impact factor. But the first one was effective, I think. Unemployment insurance claims. I was using our state unemployment insurance claims, but that's really less useful now since we had all the fraud. I was one of those people that someone stole my identity and claimed that I was unemployed. My HR department actually called me and said, did you get fired? I'm like, you're my HR department. Why are you asking me if I got fired? Am I fired? I don't know. So I haven't used that, but all that was really useful information. So I just put up the federal data. So you can see that it remained pretty flat. If I were to guess, I do believe that unemployment insurance claims really were going up after all the data gets corrected. And that was kind of our forecast all the way back in April and May, is that the U.S. was going to lay off a lot of people. We're going to lay off some, and then we're going to continue to lay off throughout the rest of the year. And depending on how long it lasts, we're going to see more layoffs, because that's what we did in previous recessions. So I think that was still on my list of thinking about that drain on our labor market and how it's affecting us, although I can't really look at the data right now. All right, let's measure the impact. What was the overall impact from COVID? This is on the household side. I usually look at the employment side, but it still gives you a perspective. And this is cumulative all the way back in December of 19. Our employment was going up a little bit right before COVID hit. You can see the drop. Actually, when I was asked to do the impact study back in April and then update our forecast in May, which was still super early on to try to figure this out. And I thought we would have lost closer to around 10%, and we'd be 10 to 12% for the state. I thought we were going to be worse than the nation. And there's a few things I got wrong, and then as I look back at it, the first issue is Kansas businesses tend to hold more cash than the nation. So we had more cash to hold on and to hold the labor. Second thing is, remember how I've talked about that tight labor market? Talked about how it's already harder to get an employee in and then to retain an employee in Kansas. So employers here, even the last recession, we tend to hold on to that labor. We were less on that marginal worker. We were more on that critical labor. I still needed to fill that position, and so we're less likely to let them go unless we really had to. So I think that's really one of the factors going on here, why we didn't get quite as deep on the employment side. Because if I look on the output side, we were a lot deeper than the nation. We were right there at the national level, and we had in Sedgwick County, although the data's here, not here yet. I'm sure we're going to be much deeper than the nation, just because of aerospace. So employment came down, but not as much as I expected, and it's been coming back. It looks like we're back to zero, but if I look on the employer side, we're not there. We're still well below. If you look at the different areas, the metro areas, all of them were much more hurt because of those hard-hit industries. Think about restaurants, things like that, traveling. That's where you have the congregation of those sectors, so they were hurt a lot more, and we lost a lot more jobs, very labor-intensive ones. And then you can see the slow recovery from them. Right now, Kansas City and Wichita are still struggling. Kansas City more of a tourism destination, and that's why they're struggling even more than us. They have even more of a pull on that retail side. Unemployment, here's a different look. So not unemployment rates, this is the level of unemployment. Skyrockets, comes right back down. But I want you to look over here for Sedgwick, or for the Wichita area, it goes up much higher. What is happening right there? This is that story I told you last time. You said we have a tight labor market, and I said we don't have a tight labor market. Last year I said we were starting to get there, but we're not as tight as the national economy because we have people in this market that are not even out there looking for a job. So they're not on this data set normally. They're in aviation. They know they don't have an opportunity, so they just leave the market, stop looking, and sit at home and wait for the market to return, and they're going to get back engaged in the labor market. Right? And I kept saying they're out there. Even though unemployment's low, they're out there. So what happened? When two spouses are at home saying, oh my goodness, we're about to have a shutdown, you've been unemployed for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you've got to go look for a job because we're not going to make it. That's why unemployment insurance in Sedgwick County skyrocketed. All of a sudden we had all these people who were discouraged workers in our labor market, particularly Wichita, who all of a sudden entered the labor market and said, I've got to have money because my spouse works over here in retail or food service, and they're going to lose their job. So we had this massive spike. But that's also the huge problem we have in here because they weren't previously looking for a job. They didn't qualify for a lot of the unemployment benefits. So because they weren't already looking for a job, they just ran into this market. So they didn't get impacted because of COVID. They were impacted from a previous event. I think that's an important factor since you think about crime and some of the issues here. This is the issue. Right? This is households who their household income went down because they've been unemployed for a while. And then they try to get back in the labor market, and their spouse then lost a job. So you have two people who now have less income. And they're in a very different situation than most other places in the U.S. or in the state were, right? Where they were at a good time with everyone was fully employed. We were less fully employed here. Here's another way to look at this. So labor force adds employment plus unemployment, and you get this labor force. You have to be actively looking. That's why all of a sudden, at the national level, there were marginal workers. Let me stop there. Right? There was that tight labor market. You said, I'll go back to work. They're going to pay me a little bit more to go and engage in the labor market. And so when this happened, they said, absolutely, I'm getting out of this game. Why do I need to work right now? I already had made a lot of money. So at the national level, labor force went down. In Kansas, it stayed flat. So in Kansas, we're at a position where when you live in Kansas, you actually work in Kansas, right? We have less of that flexible labor out there. So it stays right there. And then you can see over here in Wichita, our labor force expanded, right? All of a sudden, we have tons more people just entering the labor market looking for a job, right? And that put a pressure on the system. If you talk to employers, matter of fact, even you, I'm sure you had a lot more applications all of a sudden, hit this saying, I'll just take anything. They didn't even qualify for the job. People were just flooding the system. That was all on the employment side. Here's the output side, and only for the second quarter. This is not the percent change. This is the contribution to how our GDP dropped. And I like this because it says, how important are these sectors plus their decline? So you can have a smaller decline in a sector, but if they're very important, it gets blown out a little further. And this is where I got exactly right in our model when I did the impact of COVID. I said, It's not the hard industries, it's manufacturing. Matter of fact, if I broke manufacturing out further, it was aerospace and durable goods, even across the state, was going to be the biggest impact, much larger than this. Now I put on here, I'm sorry, Lindsay, I can't seem to get in the right spot. You're going to get a lot of ab work today. So down here you can see U.S. and Kansas, and it shows that because we're a harder impact on manufacturing, that would have a big impact compared to the national economy. You go all the way up to that arts, entertainment, and recreation, that entertainment side, we didn't have nearly the impact because we're not a tourism sector like other parts of the national economy is. So a very different shift on how it impacted us versus other states and other regions. Now in here, you don't see the oil and gas really show up here. You see a little bit of that mining up here, but it's a big driver. Although it had a small impact that second quarter, if I add the third quarter and fourth quarter, that energy sector was slowing us down as well. Bigger impact here on that sector. And those are the ones that weren't talked about as much. I used the same kind of format here. I will say I am loaded with more slides and data than I normally do. I feel like this is tons of content. So you have to engage a little bit, get the energy up in the room so that we pause a little bit and get interaction, or we're going to get, I'm going to get worn out too, just talking from slide to slide. And usually I try to keep them the same theme, but it's hard to do that with all these different ones. So be engaged. I use this one because we used it last time. This is our current condition index for the Wichita area. This is a broad barometer just to say, how is this overall economy? We take employment and output and wages and all these different factors, put it into one number. How do we feel today? And if you look at this, you can see the gray bars are recessions. You can see the build up. The last Great Recession, we were doing good in the middle of it and then dropped. And it took us a while to come out of that. We had that 16, 17 drop in the economy, which I predicted and talked about. We started coming up. We were really starting to really kick off. And then you see the very steep drop. Now notice, it's not surprising, this is the lowest point on the current condition index. Even if I went back further, this is the lowest point we ever had during the pandemic, right when we shut down. Economy stopped, right? People were unemployed. You can see it's coming up, but it's still, we've wiped out several years on our index. We're still way below all the growth that we had. Now it's interesting, the two that I have on the top right, last time those were not actually slowing our economy, hours worked and earnings, and the two on the bottom were actually much stronger for us in our index last year. They flipped, right? We have employment issues, unemployment issues really was slowing us down this time, but hours worked in manufacturing was going up. Earnings was going up. What was going on here? Well, first hours worked and earnings. In aerospace, we laid off the lower skilled, the lower paid jobs. All of a sudden they went out. We said, we're going to work you more hours, those higher skilled jobs. And that made our wages go up too. So it's a little bit of a misnomer of looking at it saying they were that positive. It wasn't that positive. It was just a shift in the labor and how both they were just going to work more hours and get rid of the lower cost ones, so the shift got to be an average higher wage. So it makes it look better than it really is. All right, aerospace. A couple years ago, including the county, said we need an aerospace index to help understand our aerospace companies. This is not Wichita specific. This is just aerospace in general. I thought this is important to still come. You can see that drive up into, it's really growing in aerospace. Didn't happen here, but it's growing. And then you can see the drop. We lost the entire decade worth of activity in our aerospace index. That's at the national level, not including ours. And then it's been coming back up, but we're still a long ways to go. The ones that are really weighing down, employment down here, overall production, and then you can see exports, the civilian aircraft exports. Trade has completely come to a halt. That was a very big concern. But you can see it starting to come up right at the end. The two that are on the more positive one, wages went up, but I already talked about wages in the previous one. And then you see these national defense. I put it on a positive because federal money just keeps money flowing. And actually, if you talk to some of your aerospace employers, they're going to say that defense has been propping them up for quite a while. We've been moving more to defense the last several years. And that's the only thing that provided stability to those sectors. They had more of that defense side. Yes?
On these slides, it looks like it's taking sometimes 2 to 5 years for those to bounce back after the last major recession. And I'm sure you're going to get to this when we talk about recovery, but do you think we'll bounce back quickly from this, or do you think this is gonna be another glide path of 2 to 5 years of pain?
That's a great question, and for the people online, the question is, an observation is that if you look at the previous recessions, it took a couple years, 2 to 5 years, for it to start to recover. The question is, based on that, do we think this index or aerospace itself will take 2 to 5 years? Now, I know the aerospace employers in town have said this is going to take a long time. So they've already had made that comment a few months ago, saying it's going to be a long time before they come back. However, I think I have a slide here later. There's a few things that are different this time than last time. Last time, as I shared with you, aerospace did not have a full restructuring of the industry for years and years and years. And so we were putting it off. And when you go to the Great Recession, particularly in our side of aviation, we all of a sudden added technology and added a second round and a third round. And I've talked about this, all those structural changes. We got more efficient. We were a mom and pop aerospace. Now we are a very professional and business-driven financial model of aerospace. So we went through a big structural shift. So we got rid of all that loose weight and all that excess costs. We're much more efficient as an industry. The next question is, where will be that demand? I'll show you later, but already the global economy is improving. Demand is improving a lot more. I think that is actually a much better sign than I think our aerospace is recognizing of being a good driver for this. If we come out of COVID and keep things down and we don't have another strand of COVID that really stops our economy, that stops the commercial flying, as long as we don't have something like that happen, I think aerospace might be a little bit more, there might be more opportunity than that. Now, how long will it take? On the commercial side, it's going to take a long time to get through all of the tarmacs that we have, that 400 some fuselages sitting out there. Now, Boeing knows that they need to keep the health of the system, so they're going to continue to have that production. They just don't need it. So it's going to take a while to really get that ramped up on that side. Now, interestingly, and I'm surprised we haven't had more positive news on this, but I've been looking at the data. We actually had negative data on the business jet side. The flight hours, everything is completely improved. It took over a decade to improve that market. But that market on the business jet side looks so much better than it did before. So that could actually come up. That might actually turn around. What are the factors? We went away from this over the last decade, saying business profits were a key factor for business jets. Honestly, that might actually become a good driver again. And as soon as we get out of this market, global economy improves. That'll take 6 months, but business jets could be really jumping back. The beginning of next year, for example, could be a good side where we see those orders coming in. But orders come in, and it takes a long time for our aerospace to really gear in. We have to start hiring again. Then we have that problem of finding labor. We'll be on that stage of that game. So it might be a little bit better than what some of our big aerospace companies just stated a few months ago. They were very negative, saying it's going to take 3 to 5 years. It might be a little bit more, we might be surprised by that. I'm usually a Duke of doom and gloom. Was that a little more positive than normal? All right. So questions about kind of the depth of what happened over the last year. We're almost at a year. Any questions about that? Yeah, so the comment online, the Textron had a good year despite what's going on. It's a shift.
Break even at least.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Yeah.
So, the private industry is still hanging in.
The comment there, maybe the private industry is still hanging in their demand for it. I think there's some news, middle of last summer saying, hey, that might actually increase the demand. It didn't get quite the demand and traction that we were wanting, but I think it's just people are holding and nervous, right? You really can't have, the economy can't function correctly when you have COVID. COVID is this, it's even worse. You get policy, which is hard to predict. COVID, we couldn't predict at all, right? So businesses were holding back. We couldn't do anything. We had a change in policy, so businesses were really in a holding game. It didn't matter if their profits are up. We've gotten past both of those. We're getting past both of those. So I think that will open it up. And Textron, I think, will see a much better year.
So speaking of global markets, have you compared the United States to around the world and how our economy has been impacted compared to
Great question. So the question is, how has our economy in the U.S. compared to other global economies? And I thought about I had a slide for where we are in the recession and the depth, but I didn't put it on here, and I'm trying to remember some details. Let me think about that, and maybe I can get back to kind of how the U.S. has been impacted. You've heard some of the headline news of COVID being more of a problem in the U.S., right? And some of the shutdowns and policies that were implemented in the U.S. created some issues. We didn't stick to one strategy, and we were kind of vague, and so that created some more issues across the national economy. Then didn't matter where you are politically. You had other countries that went, no masks and no control, and then they had some recoveries faster, and you had other countries that had more control and actually been recovering a little bit better. We've been kind of flopping around and that seems to have created some slower components to our economy, but I can't really speak. Let me think about what I saw in the data. I don't usually look at that comparison too often, so I don't want to go too much further than that. All right, let me give you a few more data. So where this is the survival part. Here's employment. The top one, leisure and hospitality, think restaurants, but that's also entertainment, things like that. You can go, this is month over month. You can see April, it declined 35% of employment, completely shut down, right? The very next month, it increased 20-some%. Now, on that restaurant side, it wasn't the full service side. It was Chick-fil-A trying to figure out how to get more bodies outside to do your drive-through to get you in and out faster. So a big shift in there, what is driving up. You go down the list, and you can see it goes smaller and smaller and smaller, all the way down to professional business services just stopped, right? I like this slide because it shows you post-COVID, right in the middle of it, it's changed. It was different. Different sectors had a different impact. Now I'm going to show you a different one. This is the cumulative change in employment all the way back relative to January. That's why January is 0. And you can see the hardest hit, leisure and hospitality, 35, but it's slowly getting better and better and better, but still hard hit. And you can see down here in manufacturing, it wasn't at the top, but it is now doing still. That's that continued loss, other issues in manufacturing really draining on that sector. But you have a few sectors, retail, trade, actually net up 4% than it was in January, right? You can see over here in transportation, trade, this is up 3%. Transportation down here and utilities are up 6%, right? There's a shift in where people are going, what we're needing. Why? Well, if you go over here to retail trade, we didn't do the specialty stores. We were consuming tons. That was that retail therapy. We were going to big box stores, buying tons of goods, fear and so forth. We had extra cash because of stimulus out there purchasing. But that doesn't mean all retail is doing good. The small retailers were destroyed after this, and they're still struggling. On the trade, transportation, and utilities, which is broken out twice, so be careful. They don't look like they're two things. They're actually components of each other. But on the trade, transportation, utilities, what happened there? It's that last mile. We were buying stuff online. All of a sudden, we needed more warehouse space. We needed more truck drivers to get you to stuff to your house. So it shifted and created tons of opportunities and demand down in those sectors. All right. Here's GDP, and this will probably be revised too. But you can see Kansas, you see it was growing. We dropped significantly in that second quarter, and in the third quarter it's coming back up. It's about 1.9% from where it was to 0, and there's over 3% to get up to our previous peak. 3% growth is pretty strong. I think it might actually get revised down a little further. I think that's a little overly optimistic. It does get revised quite a bit, but it's showing that we're coming back. The good news is we're coming back. And we've gained a lot of ground already from that loss in that second quarter. All right, here's the misery index. I love this one. This shows how miserable households feel. And imagine someone in here probably works a lot with the households, right? Who works with a lot with households, with billing and stuff like that? No one in here works with billing? Okay. Well, I'm sure they're going to say they're always grumpy people, right? Households are always grumpy. So they're always miserable. I put this on here because we created this for the Great Recession to understand the household side, and there's a problem with it today. Because look at this. Look at over here on the left side, Kansas. We had a big misery coming up, and it's coming back down. We're almost back to where we were. You're saying today we're feeling almost as good as we were just before COVID hit? I mean, that's the mystery behind this. On the right side, you can see that Wichita, by the way, is feeling a lot more miserable than everyone else in the state. What are the components? Why is this really not really matching up with how we think households are feeling? Well, think about yourself. your value of your house went up by a whole lot, didn't it? Everyone, your value went up how? Because someone's doing valuations. You feel better because of it. Inflation remained extremely low, so it doesn't matter. Your wages stayed the same. Your inflation stayed low. You could buy more stuff. The stimulus hits you, so you have more cash and disposable income to go buy more goods, right? And unemployment, most people in here really weren't impacted too much, right? So if you took it at the aggregate of this Wichita economy or Kansas economy, they came out pretty darn good, but it doesn't capture what really happened to all households. There are some households that are taking the full brunt of it. They just happen to be the lower income household, right? They have to be the people that don't really affect the overall economy as much. So, and they're the ones that couldn't have taken advantage of the house values increasing. They probably didn't even have a house. They're more likely renting. So unfortunately, it says a recession, it says our index says we're feeling a whole lot better, but I don't think we're really quite feeling a lot better. I think some people feel really good, and they have so much pent-up demand and so much energy, they're just waiting for us to have this herd immunity, and they can go out and have their big cruise or wherever they want to go. But that doesn't show how all households work. Why? Here is this roller coaster we've had for the federal stimulus. You can see it really, this is as it came into the economy, you can all the way up. It came down, and I was arguing all the way back in October we needed a second round. I was really worried about bankruptcies and households, and we needed that cash to go through it. It came in later. Actually, if it came in earlier, I think most economists thought it would be much more effective. Our economy would have been a little bit stronger. We would have had better December retail sales, but it didn't happen. It was a little late, but it still helped, and that's where we're at right now. Here's a cumulative effect. Here shows how it's been injected into the economy. Now, you guys didn't really ask about federal, so I guess I won't talk about federal too much and how impact it was. But I will say the first round, I think, was a lot more effective. The second round, I'm not sure how effective it really is. We're spending money, which I'll show you later, on things that people are just then taking cash and hoarding, right? We're not actually keeping the cogs moving as much. The first round kept cogs moving, kept our economy and let it bounce up. Here's the other one. That stimulus check, it went to households. What did they do with the cash? That's the question. The lower income households, they paid expenses. That's the cog moving forward. That's exactly what we wanted everyone to do. Take your cash and go spend it right now, because that keeps the cog moving. That keeps the velocity of money just turning and churning and churning. Because what was happening is everyone was afraid, I better hold my money because I might not be able to pay rent tomorrow, or I need to have food tomorrow, so I'm going to stop spending on all these other goods. That cash put in there, I said, I can go spend it because this is not what I was counting on. And they put it out there. So lower households did it. The higher income households, particularly if you get over $75,000, they just started hoarding cash, right? So that first round, get money out, it was efficient. The second round, getting money out, especially higher incomes, they're just hoarding cash, right? They're actually making them feel better. They put more investments. Now they put it in the stock market and they saw it go up further, or they bought a new house, right? They're feeling better, but they're not really engaging the economy as much as we want them to. So that dollar for every federal dollar was being less efficient for the higher incomes. It's not keeping the economy moving. People are just hoarding cash. Now, it is creating pent-up demand. So when we do see things move forward and the uncertainty kind of really comes out, all of a sudden you're going to have all this demand to consume goods. Where are they going to consume? They're going to consume higher-end goods and services. Think about examples here, and I've actually never even been to, what's that, Sherry Dawn, what's that, she does that wine in town. Jenny Dawn, think about that, and Coco Dolce, that's the goods that people are going to consume more of. If they're not doing it now, they're going to consume more. They'll want higher-end goods to consume, because that will help those small retailers to come back and those big services to come back once we really open more of that market up. All right, I only picked 2 negatives and 2 positives to really dig in on the employment side to see how it's been going. So here's the manufacturing. And you can see, again, the recession, pretty flat, really starting to decline again in that 16 and 17, even though we had positive news. We really started taking off. You see in the end of 19, we ran into that tight labor market. They were looking for jobs, really weren't getting wages quite up high enough, and then the big dropped. So we've now are below where we were in our history, right? We've just lost all the employment. They're sitting out there. Now, in January, I came and talked about 737 MAX and said, oh my goodness, my big fear is this is a specific thing again for Wichita. We're going to lose labor again, where people are going to migrate out when they wouldn't normally migrate out. We had all these people still unemployed I said, this is going to be a bad thing. And here's one of those blessings in disguise on something I would have never wanted, but because of COVID, everyone stopped hiring, and we didn't have that out-migration that we were expecting. Now, there's some out-migration. People had to move, but that put a pause button on all that labor movement for a 737 to be fixed. Now that actually is going to be much better for overall labor market as we come back. They're staying put, right? Because there's not another opportunity out there. We just need to have, while 737 MAX is coming, we need to get that hiring back, and re-engaging that labor market right now will tie them back to the community, and we won't have that out-migration issue that we've had the last couple of years. So I think that was the blessing in disguise of something really, really bad, and although it's still not looking good. Leisure and hospitality, you can see the big, big drop. It's been back up, but it's so far from where it was before, right? I think some of this, we got to be careful, although I think there's a lot of value for that small business. Some of them are structured. We have a great system in the United States where bankruptcies can be very healthy, right? It takes the burden away and pushes it out. This is actually going to call in the stronger players they're struggling, but those who will stay will actually be able to increase prices later and actually improve and be much more efficient, right? So although this looks horrible, and it is horrible, I think this sector can recover a little bit more resilient than we're thinking right now, because there's a lot of bad stories in this sector. All right, here's retail. This is retail trade. Here's our positive news. You can see it down, and it's been coming back up. We were different than the nation. We were already going through this downward shift in retail, whereas the national economy, they were getting flat. We were losing employment in that retail. We were already shifting online. We had all the other issues going on. So we're already coming back up. I would imagine retail will come up a little bit more, and that might help that small retailer over this next summer. Retail sales too. Why people are surprised by this? Because all that stimulus funds, we're saving money, not driving cars so much. We have all this cash to spend. We could spend a lot more. So when you're talking about the budget, once we really open up, we can consume. The question is, how much are we going to consume here in Kansas versus going out of Kansas because we put off our big travel plans, our big ticket items? How much is going to be consumed somewhere else? That's the question that I have, how much are we going to be able to capture of it? Well, think about your own budget. Some people have said, I really wanted to go to Italy. I remembered using vacations last year. Some people put different places all over the world, right? You wanted to go there, but you could never afford it. All of a sudden, some of you can now actually think about going to that vacation spot you put up on that map last year, right? That's where I think we might lose some of that retail spending power here, unfortunately, because we're going to buy really high-end, expensive items once the market gets open. That is a concern. Another one that's more positive, and this is strange, professional and business services. Now, in Kansas, particularly here in Wichita, and I'm showing you Sedgwick County, or Wichita MSA, we have a lot of these contract services related to not only aerospace, but oil and gas, where we have this infrastructure supporting them. And you can see that it's actually been growing. At the national level and Kansas level, professional business services usually decline when the overall all employment declines. They'll go up and down. So what is happening here? I don't really have the answer. It could be that we outsourced more. We had a whole lot of outsourcing to some of the sector where they had this labor inside Textron. Now they shifted out over here to some supplier out here to help provide their accounting services or whatever it might be. But something's happened because it actually had a spike here in our market versus going down. So it's something I'm going to watch and have to start thinking about what is happening under this sector. All right. Surprise. How many people were at a movie? You sat there and you didn't really like the movie. You got an hour and a half in and you said, oh, crap, this is a 2-hour movie. How many people were surprised by that? I know you've done. Come on. This feels like this. We thought it was an hour and a half movie, and it's a 2-hour movie. It won't ever stop. So here's my little surprise here. Does it get worse? Let me pause before I go forward. Thoughts, comments, questions? Somehow I didn't get quite as interactive with you guys so far today. Yes.
We've seen a change in the way it is to manufacture, more automation, much detail. That whole sector of the labor force, are they not going to probably come back as quickly
So I'm going to reiterate, first to make sure I understand the question, but also for those people online. So it sounds like you have two observations. One, in the manufacturing side, we got rid of low-skilled labor because of all this automation. We had a lot of it here, particular here more than the nation. And then because of retail, also low-skilled, where's the demand for that particular, moving to online? Do we have a class of workers on lower skilled that are going to be left abandoned in our labor market? Is that kind of the right characterization? Yeah. I think those are really good, great points of view. I think that's what we've been struggling with when you talk about mental health and crime as one issue that we've been dealing with for the last several years in aerospace. We went, and I use this example, and I've said it often, when I first got here over a decade ago, we were doing hand rivets. That hand rivets is almost completely gone. We did tons of it. So now you have these people who have a skill, that's actually higher skilled, but they have a skill that got left behind, and how are they fitting within the labor market? It takes a long time for the labor market to shift and mold and fit to a new economy. And we had a new economy here. The US economy just bounced back and hired the same people. But we were already dealing with this pressure within the system, this friction within the system of trying to retrain and taking time to do it. And because of that, that's put issues on income and households, families having problems, right? There's some already pressures there. And it had downward pressure on wages because we had excess people. You add into this retail side, would that create more of a problem? Well, let me pause on the first one. First one is an issue, and it's been healing, right? This campus right here is doing a great job of really doing that retraining, right? Telling people, here's your new job, here's how you can re-engage in the labor market. We're doing great stuff, even on the national scale of how we're re-engaging the labor market, getting them there. It just takes a long time to get rid of that friction of it. And it'll take a couple more years before we really get those people that, the unemployment went up so high, we still have more people out there who need to re-engage in the labor market. So I think there's demand for them, there's demand for their skills. It just takes a lot of time to get rid of that friction. On the retail side, let me separate that one. I think retail is going to come back. We won't get quite, but we already lost a lot. We already got rid of a lot of the excess labor. On the employment side, some of them are going to come right back. We want to consume. We're a consumption economy. It's in our mindset. We're going to be out there consuming. It just might not be exactly where they wanted. The malls, which is a different question than you were getting at, the malls is a very different story. We're not going to go consume at the malls. The town west has already had a nail in the coffin. Town east is now, that's going to put a lot of pressure on them. That consumption's gone. How we consume is going to be different. So I think that will come back a little bit, or they can transition a little bit easier into a different sector of the economy. I know there's low skill, but there's some opportunities to re-engage in that low skill. They might not be doing what they want, but there's some other demands for some really low skilled in our market. Yeah.
Yesterday, we received a briefing from our appraiser on what the past looks like, which is going to result in an impact on government.
Yep.
And what we found out was that the market for housing here in Sedgwick County, which used to be maybe 30 days a house would stay on the market, now it's down to 1 or 2 or 3 days that it's staying on the market. In addition, the majority, way large majority of the sales are going up in price, and our appraisals are going up as a result. The government's going to have more money, so we rely on property tax. So I guess my question is, where is the money coming from to drive all of this?
So those people online, the conversation was about, someone was talking about the appraisal and the housing market and how, because of all these shifts in demand, right, households looked and said, I want that Texas-sized home, that Texas-sized property, and they went and shifted over. And so they had all this demand for upper middle income to higher income households, right? They had all this, let me give a value. I'm going to throw out a number, and I don't really know the quite number, but it was at least $150,000 homes and higher, right? That was where the prime market was, where people were really consuming. Probably 150, if I was to guess, to 300 or 350 was in that range where all the demand was. Right, so you had all this demand. The inventory, and you said it went from 30 days to 1 to 3 days. Honestly, it wasn't even 1 to 3 days in some of the really prime spots. If you had that extra office and larger yard, it was hours for the demand, and that pushed up that price at that house went pretty high. Now, it's interesting, the question, and then the statement was beyond that, was it was going to improve revenue for local government, right? You're going to get more because you have property values went up. And then the question beyond that was, who's going to pay for that, right? So let me pause there. Let's first think about housing as the cost of housing as a percent of your overall budget. And I don't have the numbers because I haven't looked at it lately, but we are pretty darn low. I mean, we could buy a lot of house here in Wichita, this area, for what it was pre-COVID, right? So we had the ability to get into bigger loans that we could have, right? So we have a lot of demand for that housing side. That is not really a concern. Some people are going to get tied on this, where they got such an incentive to say, hey, I don't have to worry about the cost of this house because the interest rates are so low that it actually is going to come out even though I know I'm overpaying for the house. So on that side, some people are going to get in trouble and they're not going to be able to pay. But I don't think we're going to be in such a big issue where they can't pay because of overall cost and affordability of housing is pretty great here, that I don't think there's going to have a massive housing problem in that sense. But who pays for it? Well, the federal government's been paying for it and bankers, right? The interest rates are so low, they can't. They're the ones that can't afford it. They're the ones that can't really make these ends meet. Volume was helping them this last year. I showed you finance. Finance actually, they kept on every person they could because they were refinancing mortgages, trying to get as many houses as they could. But the federal government and the people on the investment sides are what's going to hurt of it keeping it so low. So I don't think it's as big of an issue for households here to be in a risk that then they're going to go, that it's going to create a housing, we have a housing bubble or any kind of big defaults that then we'll have problems on the housing market. I don't think that would be an issue, and I haven't heard Stan Longhofer, who's the real expert on this one, haven't heard him talk anything about that either. So on the other side, yes, it brought up values. Are we going to be stuck at these values for a little while? I bet they'll be sticky a little bit. I don't think they're going to be coming down too fast. I can't imagine it coming down. I think they're going to stay there. Yeah, you want to follow up?
But if you look at the slides on the misery index
Mm-hmm.
and the total number of people that are out of jobs and so forth, it just seems like it doesn't equate to what's happening in the housing market.
So yes, I'm going to get into the next few slides about the differences between households, because a lot of people got left behind in this, right? If you were upper middle income and higher, you benefited greatly. Everyone lower took all the heat and all the costs associated with it. But they just didn't get to take advantage of the opportunity to have their wealth grow, right? So the people in here, all your wealth grew. Your house, if you owned a house, you just grew. Your savings, you just grew your wealth, right? But the rest of them, that's what I'm going to tell the rest of the story right here. Does that work? All right. This one is great. This census was just the perfect time. They went out and started doing these surveys every single week. And I only put a few weeks on here, but when it says June 4th, that's the week of June 4th. And I just did this to have slides. There's so much more depth in this, so if some of you really need to get in more detail, there's tons more data behind this. But they kept asking all these questions every single week to really understand what was going on. First one in, you can see they asked every single time in Kansas. Unfortunately, they did some MSAs, we didn't have ours. We weren't big enough for them to put us on here. So we don't have us, but you can see 40% as of the June, the week of the 20th, you can see over 40% of households said they had lost income that week. But in this room, you didn't lose any income. You all got paid the exact same. Matter of fact, your disposable income still increased because you got the checks from the federal government, so you had more cash. But yet we had 40% of the households still struggling and losing cash, right? I mean, that's where the broad economy, when you add it together, doesn't really understand the segment who really lost. 40% were still losing income. They were still having a big issue of the cash side. Second one, housing insecurity. Look at housing insecurity. It keeps going up and up and up. Our housing insecurity is not a problem of the house side. This includes your mortgage payment and rent. This is housing. You could not make your payment. So it's now up over 10% in Kansas. If I looked at this across Kansas, this is not rural. This is only Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City. That's the only markets that we're really talking about here. It is the rental side. If I look at the rental side, we are through the roof on issues of housing insecurity in this market. And it's because all these people who were, back to your point, the people who were already disengaged in the labor market, they couldn't engage, they were struggling to pay, they couldn't get a job. Then you have some people in retail that got laid off and food service that got laid off who are not being able to make their housing payments. It continues to go up. That's the segment that we should be really worried about. Food scarcity, that December one was really a surprise. But the food scarcity, over around 7% of households did not have enough food to eat that week. Come down to food insecurity with children, thankfully it's not too high, not as high as the nation, but still almost 7% of people with kids in Kansas had food insecurity. Again, if we took this and knocked out the rest of Kansas, because this is not a rural issue, this is an urban issue. We get into Wichita, Topeka, and even less of Topeka, to be honest with you, Kansas City and Wichita, that's where your food insecurity issues are for children and families, because we have also the lowest income ones. We have a lot more households who have really low income paid jobs here than you do in Western Kansas, right? We also have more of the insecurity of some of those jobs than Western Kansas has. So if I could weight this, and I can't, but it would be a lot higher for us, right? That's the household that's really struggling today. Here's a few, because there's so much data. It was so rich. This is still the week of the 20th. The likelihood of eviction or foreclosure. Now, those people who are struggling with rent, they asked, it doesn't matter about the moratorium, they asked, do you think you're going to get evicted? Almost 38% in Kansas said that. Imagine what is higher for Wichita. Difficulty paying household expenses, 30%. Uncontrollable worrying. Right, they had other worrying, but this is uncontrollable. This is when you just sit there and you can't even function as a person. Talking about mental health and issues, you can't sit there and make it through your day because you worry so much that you can't even. You might be at work, but you don't think you're going to make ends meet. You're not being productive. Guess what's going to do with employment? Right, this is the issue that we have to worry about right now. I put this one on here. This is the same week. Unfortunately, they didn't have this broken out by race for us here. And we had some great data for unemployment claims, but I couldn't show it to you because I'm not sure how accurate it is. But it shows that for the issues from household paying expenses, which does impact different segments more. So minorities, particularly Black, and I was looking at Black here in Kansas on our unemployment insurance claims in October. It was a lot higher, right, per capita. Right, there are segments of the population that are hit a lot worse than others. Now I split. Because of the unemployment insurance claims, I put like 2.5, 3 hours putting these two slides together for you, because she asked, how do we look at different household segments? It's not as interesting as it was going to be, but I did it anyway. This is not unemployed. This is not employed. So you could be not in the labor market and be happy with not in labor before COVID and after COVID. But this shows the share in Kansas so 65 and above is a great example. People start retiring, right? So you have a lot of people who are unemployed. Same thing with females were more likely to be not employed. At the national level, women were more likely to be laid off than men. What I showed last October, which I think was pretty accurate, we saw men were increasing much more per capita here because of the manufacturing side. So there's some deeper issues there, although this is showing volume. And then you can see by race and then by education. I took this and said, hey, if we applied this to Sedgwick County and said we look just like the state, and we don't, by the way, we don't look anything like the state, but it's just to give you some numbers, how many people would be in these categories of not employed, to show what the impact might be. And in this case, you can see 65 and above is not really that useful, but you can see the big hit of that younger age cohort would be impacted. By volume, and this is volume, not per capita, just because we have a lot more white people are going to be impacted. Female, we're going to be impacted most in less than high school. That low education, low skilled position is going to be more likely not employed. In that case, they're more likely also unemployed too at the lowest education sector. All right, that was the household side. Let me move over to the business side of this. On the business side, I find this really interesting, right? We're thinking we're coming out of this market, we think we're doing better, but look at the share of businesses still saying of that week, and this is the week of January 4th, that said they had a negative impact because of COVID. We still have a lot of companies saying, I might be open for business, but I'm still struggling today, right? It's not everybody. We're not past it quite yet. The cogs aren't moving. They're still saying very negative. Revenues, almost 30% So the revenues decreased in January. That's after the stimulus started coming out. So there's still quite a few businesses, even though we had another injection, it just didn't change a whole lot. And then he asked them, how many are you going to rehire those people you just laid off? And we can see that still over 30% saying that they have no interest in rehiring. So we have some stickiness in this labor market. Not only those households who were already impacted back in last April, they stayed unemployed or got maybe furloughed, came back, they're furloughed again, and they're laid off now, but the market's not really functioning. Those cogs aren't moving quite fast enough to really get that labor engaged quite yet. Am I painting enough of a picture to see that one segment? I was trying to really tease that out so you can see how that one segment's really impacted. And although most people feel better and we're thinking things are moving forward, I don't think the cogs are moving quite fast enough for that to work. Now, what will make it happen? It really is all due to COVID, right? As long as we keep getting vaccines out and keep the positive news out there, then the market is going to open up. And I think, honestly, it really won't take a whole lot of stimulus to do a third round. As long as we continue to improve, the market's going to, we have all this pent-up demand and all this cash to just fuel the economy. It will finally kickstart and go. It's kind of like a car, you hear it rumbling a little bit, you just need a little bit more gas, then all of a sudden it's going to go. We don't need a whole lot more gas on this economy, I don't think. All right, this one was not great news. I compared Kansas businesses to the nation. Again, there's too many slides, too many numbers. But our future needs, we were less likely to say these items. We were less likely to obtain financial assistance in the future. That's concerning. Less likely to identify a new supplier. Less likely to develop online sales than the nation. We are less likely to increase marketing. That's concerning that where businesses are not out there engaged saying being hungry to go and do the next thing. That wasn't a lot of change. I just wanted to tease out something. It was similar to the nation. We're just a little bit less likely to do those. Expectations. I think our expectations of companies are pretty realistic on those. The bottom one is really concerning. Almost 11% said they will never come back. And I'm going to show you the next slide to put this in context to the nation. If you look on this left to right axis, this is how large, the percent saying there's a large effect. So we have less businesses saying there's a large effect on their company on average. However, if you go up on the y-axis, this is those percent of businesses saying that they're never going to come back. We were the highest in the nation. It was actually the highest in the nation more than one week, by the way. But we're the highest in the nation of companies saying they're just never going to see demand come back, ever. I think that's a concern. Not to get you too gloomy, but I just think you want to tease you to show you the reality of how some companies might be viewing this economy. Now, they may be wrong. This is a perception. Yes?
That's exactly what I was gonna ask, is it perception or is it reality based on what you know?
The question was this perception or reality? And yes, I think this is perception. Although some businesses really have a good handle on what they're doing, right? Manufacturing has been hit really hard in the state. Some sites, some actually took off. Some manufacturers are doing plant expansions and really doing well. Aerospace is one of those that were extremely hit by this.
Is that statewide? Or is
Yeah, that's statewide.
Wichita? So it's Wichita, Kansas City, it's half the population.
Yes. So,
I'm surprised that Missouri is where it's at. Kansas City, Kansas was, or Johnson County was part of the survey. You cross the state line, and the rest of it's better in Missouri.
So yeah, there's no way for those people online, the question is, why is it so much better across the line from Kansas City? But Missouri does have a different structure of economy than we do. We have a mix of ag. Well, actually, that doesn't make sense either. I was going to say there's a different mix. There are manufacturing. Missouri is definitely manufacturing, has that similarity to us, but we have a lot more oil and ag than they do. But oil, we know about oil wasn't doing well. That's not the percent. That's just so small share of firms, they didn't impact on the survey. Ag's doing great, and ag-related businesses are doing great right now. I should have shown you this positive news. Although we're talking about Sedgwick County, they're having a fantastic year. Profit margins were horrible last several years, and all of a sudden they are making tons of money buying new equipment, by the way, that comes back to our economy because we do the manufacturing of that equipment. So Ag's doing great. So I don't know. I don't know why Missouri. I don't have a perspective off the top of my head of why they're doing so much better.
Because they expanded Medicaid.
The comment here is maybe they expanded Medicaid. All right. Happy endings. You ready for this? How are we doing on time?
We got 15 minutes.
All right. Here's just the broad distribution of the vaccines as that pulled off just yesterday morning. We're behind the state, but I will say, when you look at the models of when we'll have herd immunity means we're completely safe going around. That's September. But honestly, we should start opening up a lot more through the summer, right? We should be past a lot of those things from the economic model. So not really on the vaccine side here. I did throw this up because there was a request by this related. I thought this might have a discussion here, so I thought I'd pause here on how we might think about within the state. The question really was what is our value on the state economy and how that might relate. So I thought I would pause and see if there was any discussion here.
Okay, so, yeah, good pause. So you're saying Sedgwick County on the GDP is 33 million of the 176 million? I thought that it was a lot more.
This is 2000, let me make sure, which one is it? BEA. Yeah, 2019. So we already had some slowing down of aerospace in 19. So if I went 18, it could have been higher. Aerospace does go up and down quite a bit. So aerospace already started slowing down. That could be why you thought it was a little higher. But that was the value of goods. Still 18% of the overall state economy is through GDP from our one county. It did by the county, not by the MSA. So you also might be thinking about MSA because we have aerospace right outside the county too.
Yeah, so if you did MSA, it would probably be
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you pull in, I could pull that up if you want. The question was specifically of the county, so I was trying to get back to the county on this one. I think it would be actually useful to take this and say, hey, how much wages and per person and wages per job and GDP per person, GDP employment and so forth, take that and compare that to Johnson and Wyandotte and so forth, I think you would see a very different answer where we're bringing in a lot of dollars per person in this market.
Well, I would agree, in our county, we have a lot of employees that come in to work outside the county.
Oh, yeah.
And just by the nature of our geography, we generate GDP from sales, everything else from people coming in.
Oh, yeah, particularly Butler, right? In Cowley, they live in those counties and come over here to work, right? So we have a lot of that commute to work factor.
Well, I can appreciate the 18%. My gut says it's a lot better than.
So those people online, there's doubts. We are better than this number.
I totally.
Is there a way for you to, after this, to get the other counties? Because I asked for this so
Yeah.
that we could see as a way for vaccine distribution to make another case for us to be able to say, okay, hey, we provide this much to the state's economy. We need to get our people vaccinated so that we can get our economy going again.
So do you want county or do you want MSA?
Yeah, so 18 supports your argument on vaccination.
So for those people online, the conversations, if 18% is what we're at, we should have 18% of vaccinations. That was kind of the idea. I could get this to other counties, yes. That's not hard if you just tell me if you want it by county or MSA. And I could do it the other way where I look at how much it is per person in the county. I think that would be an interesting way.
And it's been the 18 across the board pretty much. So our argument about vaccinations is county specific at 18. I see what you're at.
All right, I'm going to go through a couple other slides. Here's our leading index. This is supposed to give us an idea of the next 3 to 6 months. You can see well, it's hard to see that yellow, but it's almost all the way back up. We're not too far off. So it's actually pointing already to some improvements. That means we're hiring and unemployment's improving enough that we could kick off if things improve a little bit further. Aircraft production, however, which is weighing us down right now, we're not producing quite yet. And same thing with just industry production is still pretty far down. Here's the good news, this international leading index, the international economy is improving. Matter of fact, with the changes in what might happen with international trade, I'm going to be a whole lot more optimistic than I was the last few years on international trade. Honestly, there were some things that teased up from the previous presidential administration. Now that we shifted administrations, I think there's a way to take advantage of that issue with China, because Europe is now very upset with China and some other countries are upset with China. We might be able to get what we really need and have a lot more open trade that will actually really boost our aerospace. So we might see some good longer term. I was teasing that up earlier with you, Lindsay. I think that might actually go pretty well. Here's our forecast. I have a high scenario and a low scenario. I really won't get into the detail. If you look at our employment, we think the second quarter is where we're going to see the growth. I think so far that's happening already. We did this back in early January. I think we're really on track to see that growth in that second quarter. That pent-up demand, all that spending to go out there. That's going to really do that next bump in our economy. And if you look at the cumulative effect, you see that in the second quarter, and then it just kind of weighs out the rest of the year because we still have issues to struggle with. Wichita, we have on the bottom, not really recovering. We're still going to be over 4% less than where we were pre-COVID. I really won't do this. I won't go through that because you had a couple other questions. One question is change. Last time I looked at protective services, here is employment of local government. I just said, okay, what are wages of local government by county, Kansas, and instead of using US, I did US metros because that's a better comparison of metro communities. I just showed how was the wage over this time period. And you can see there's a gap forming between local government over this entire time period. So I went back and said, okay, let's look at, doesn't matter if US was higher already, let's just look at that change cumulatively since 2001. And you can see over time that the local government wages have remained much lower than it was at the national or this metro area. 11 percentage points difference is what the gap was towards the very end. There was a question about CARES. I think I'm getting close to the end.
Yeah, about
8 minutes, okay. Well, do you guys want to talk about federal spending and multipliers? I didn't hear a lot of questions on how the impact were. I'm at the end, so we can go wherever you want now. No? All right. Here's CARES assistance. So the question was, you get the CARES funding, what would be how to distribute? And so I went online and said, okay, what was the register and what is the mandate for it to put out the framework? I'm struggling to figure out, and this is a discussion with you guys, if you tease up something, maybe I can have a discussion about what would the impact be in efficiency of a dollar spent somewhere. However, when I looked at this, most of it is going to already program stuff that you really don't have control over. So I don't know what the variability of it is that you think is a policy decision of how you might distribute CARES funding. But that I put this to kind of have a framework of what we can think about that I saw online.
Well, I think this is perfect. So we're basically done with CARES Act distribution at this point. We were able, I think, to address a lot. We know that we're getting round 2 funding. We are hearing that Sedgwick County alone will get $100 million. Wichita will get probably $65 million. And then there's some estimates that townships will get funding. And so it appears that there's going to be, in addition to all the other programs that are out there, government is going to get a big hunk of cash that can be used for revenue replacement, which I think will be huge for the city. But it can be used all the way through 22. And so all of the big grandiose federal rules will apply. So we're going to have to dig in and do a greater needs assessment, which is, I think, where we're trying to understand if these dollars help or hurt in the CARES Act, so we can understand if there's effectiveness to replicate those programs again, or if we start from scratch and all that.
So for those people online, the comment was, this passed, we're talking about the third round, and you might get more local government spending for it, and it'll be around $100 million available to do it. The question is then, how do you have more efficiency as a government? Obviously, replace costs, which although you've had some increased revenues in different areas, and you have more than a year to spend it. The question is what is the other distribution? So, what are the questions? Then maybe we can talk about efficiencies on the funding of it.
I think we'll probably be coming back to you at some
Okay.
point. You had a lot of slides here that reference some of those areas where maybe there is the most need that can help the overall economy. So I think we'll probably be coming back and asking for maybe a special project
Is there conversations about small business and grants and loans?
Nothing is off the table yet.
I will say, with PPP, the first round, I think I was a little concerned about it, but it was more effective than I gave credit to. The second round, I'm not sure we're getting very effective at the national level. You're putting the first round, we put dollars to people who didn't really need it or want it, right? So it was inefficient. So getting into that program, how to get, even with you guys putting it out, how do you get it to someone who really does need it and be effective? Being in local government, we can see these things a little bit better than the state or federal government can do. Okay, I get that. But we already know businesses, we're not looking for loans here. They're not wanting it, they're holding on to cash. So when you look at the drivers on the business side, aerospace, there are some concerns in aerospace. All these small businesses, this is not going to be the nicest conversation to have. But honestly, we have a great system for bankruptcies. It could be more efficient to let them go bankrupt than it is to try to help out some of the small ones, especially in support sectors. We'll let them fail because they can actually put the burden on the other system that's meant to take it, and figure out how to target the ones that will actually have intellectual property, things that you could lose real ground and infrastructure. Unfortunately, a restaurant, and I know people are going to be upset about this, but unfortunately, a restaurant can fail all the time, and they can start all the time. So figuring out putting money to some of those retail and restaurants are probably not efficient. I know why we did it nationally. It's politically easier to do everyone than really targeting, but I think most economists even said nationally, we shouldn't have done that. I mean, it would, from an economic perspective, it would have been more efficient to just target very specific sectors than it would have been to blanket and have it out for everyone. But that would have been a hard policy to create. Yes?
Slides spent a lot of time talking about the COVID impact, and it's very much appreciated on that. But there's a lot of debate happening at the state level right now, different types of taxation. I don't know if you have any kind of analysis you could provide to us. There's a lot of finger pointing going on between property taxes versus taxes versus sales taxes. The state just passed, tax policy that I don't know how it's going to end up. But there's a lot of focus right now on streaming, internet streaming taxes, internet sales taxes, food sales taxes. There's a lot of debate. Is there any type of independent analysis that you have that would help us as policymakers for this community to understand maybe your perspective on that stuff?
So for those people online, the question is, at the state level, there's lots of conversation about changes in tax policy. And do we have anything on hand to look at this? So yes and no. Let me talk broadly about how it's changed and how it created problems for the state government and even local governments. And then we can tease a little bit, but then we'll have to pause and say, okay, maybe we could do some more. And there is a lot more we could do. First of all, we got to think about how our tax structure has changed over the last decade, and changed a lot and created a lot of problems. And I made those comments early on when we had those changes. Because we shifted to retail sales and we're not a tourism state, retail sales is highly volatile. But yet cost of government is not volatile. It's mostly labor and it's very sticky. And so you have a highly volatile revenue source, a dependency on that, which is what happened. We were much more dependent on retail sales. It created a lot more problems with state government for just providing services. So the issue of that retail sales to the expenditure side, that's the pinch that we kept running into over the last decade, where it kept putting us down. So shifting it from the sense of what's the cost of how do you deliver versus the revenue stream, that's one question. Now the effectiveness of who pays for it, of each type one, that's a whole discussion we need to kind of break out and get to it. Because we're not a tourism state, the retail sales one is at a state level. Now, we're not talking about the national. There's a different question if you look at retail sales at the national level. There's a different policy kind of question and impact. But at the state level, retail sales, since we're not tourism driven, who's paying for it is always people here. And there's always a reason to kind of go around that. So there's not an incentive to really think about retail sales to being always our primary driver of really increasing that, because who funds that? We're funding it ourselves. Versus if you go to Georgia, where people drive through, they love retail sales, Same thing, Georgia and Florida love it because other people pay that cost. And then actually puts money into the governments, and it's not burden on households, right? Do you want to dig into another? I'll talk high level, but we can see efficiencies in how it might impact the economy. We can measure some of that. Even econometrically, we can measure some of that and say.
There's been an analysis done by some other organizations who talk about how our overall tax burden in Kansas is so burdensome that we are basically really hurting ourselves. I don't know how tax policy maybe really affects people's behavior, but one thing we saw just the other day was the boat registration and the policy in our state changed. I think that the other day. And how now people are registering their watercraft in Kansas, or maybe we're seeing higher revenues from that because we changed tax policy. There's a lot of debate right now about people not wanting to live in Kansas because the property taxes are so high. And I don't know how again, I'm not sure how much I trust the other organizations. I would like to have someone else speak to that besides just them. But I don't know, again, are we suffering because of our tax policy overall? Or is there something that other states are maybe someone us would say that they're doing it differently, and we're seeing them that they're thriving more than we are, for example?
So I have looked at, for those people online, the conversation went to property tax, and then specifically for boat tax might have been a source of revenue for the state. But there's skirting around to some of those issues when you increase it too high. And the comment was that there's concerns that because of the state's tax policy, that people are not is preventing moving here. Now, I will say there is a counter argument, and I'm only going to the counter argument because you said that one. We could go both sides, and I think we should have another time to talk about it. I can't get in great details. But there is a counter argument that the average household cannot estimate and really figure out that property tax, especially when you do specials. People don't really know how to add in specials and how that affects their costs. So that is really not the driver. It's usually wage that really drives people's decision of migration. So on the migration question, they're looking at this, and we actually have the counter problem to this, where the wage looks better somewhere else, and we have a lower wage. They move out because of that better wage, not because of the tax problem. So I can tell you that argument is pretty strong against us, where our wages aren't high enough that they look at the sticker price and they're going to go take the one that looks better, and they don't realize the taxes in that state might be actually even higher than us when you look at the migration to it. So let me pause. Let me stop there and go any further because I think I want to make sure we think at all sides of this. I think we can get in a longer, better conversation of how effective or inefficient they are.
Maybe another time.
Yeah. Very good. And we are out of time. I was at the end anyway. So thank you very much for letting me come. I have a couple extra booklets I gave you, so those people are online. You guys weren't here, but we had our forecast booklets. I have one from last October, which is now older data, and then one that we just released. So you're welcome to pick it up from you're going to tell them later. You can pick it up from Lindsay. She's got it in her office, I guess.
Yep, I'll get them inter-office mailed to people.
Okay, well, I don't have a whole lot. That's the rest I have there, so it's
We don't
only a
have
handful.
people.
Oh, okay.
Jeremy, before we let you
Yep.
get away, first of all, thank you for segueing into our next discussion about government wages, local versus state versus national. So thank you for that segue. But I want one question answered for the commission before you leave. The group that you talked about, and you have many slides to show the data, that we have a left behind population. And that is a concern, I think, for this organization because we provide services, public safety, EMS, sheriff jail, the courts, corrections, care. We are in that industry in this room. And when you talk about left behind populations, I see significant shift for us. So what is your message to the commission as we posture a 2022 budget on resources and what we should throw in? Should we retract? Should we expand? Give us some advice on what you see in the future.
So for those people that were online, the question is, and it's structure of governments, right? Local government does not have the automatic demand or requirement to serve all those populations. It's just always county government that has the automatic safety net for all these groups of households that are really struggling or lower income. It's not only physically where people are located, you have all the you says you put the police, the fire, and all the healthcare, mental health, things like that come into it. And then the question is, what do you think about for efficiencies or helping this segment of the population? Well, there is some great research out there, and I won't be able to get all the detail on the cost of prevention of crime, the cost of prevention of mental health, that can actually be very efficient. This is actually the federal level, but I think this is a good example to think about. The programs that we have in place like this, like the SNAP program, the unemployment insurance program, those have the highest multipliers, right? So for every dollar of federal dollars go into those programs, they're already structured so well to be pretty darn efficient to get it to the person who needs it, to be effective on there. However, that's why I was trying to talk about that PPP loans at the federal level, saying that's probably not very efficient. It was good for the time, the first round, second round, third round, I'm not so sure we really are set up for them to be efficient on the third round. I only should put this one back here to when you talk to the commissioners, you already have programs that are in place that can be very effective at helping them. The bigger issue from my perspective, and economic issues, hopefully I painted a picture. There are households here that were struggling before the COVID. There are households that are still struggling now, and getting them the right services that are effective. And I can't talk about every program being effective or not effective, but getting them right now will actually get them back in the labor market and productivity increase faster, and getting them back into re-engaged and being employed. So without knowing every single program to talk about it, I think in general, I'll say programs are fairly efficient that are already established, that they lots of science and stuff behind it to help make them efficient. So I think that helps gives you an idea of where you'd have some value or not value, a bang for a buck kind of idea. Although this is not what you're asking, I just thought that was a good parallel to what you might be wanting.
Is there something like this similar for local spending?
That's a great question. I could probably look for something like that if you would like. I could try to search for that. Particularly, it should be the county government. What's the county effectiveness of every dollar going in for police and so forth? And there's some, just to be careful, this is a broad numbers. There's going to be inefficiencies at some point. You put too much dollars in there, is going to get, every dollar you put in at that point, you're going to get less of a return. So I don't know where you are on spending, how to compare. That's a deeper conversation for your department chairs to really tell you how you compare, saying, hey, we're lower or higher. Where if we're lower than the national average, you probably could easily get, for every dollar, you're going to get a bigger bang. If we're higher than the national average or some other cities like ours, maybe you don't want to put a bigger dollar in there. Or maybe we do need it because we are having issues that they don't have in Topeka and Kansas City right now, right? So hopefully I give you the context to think about it and then say, okay, how do we then engage? That wasn't the perfect answer for you, but hopefully this set up a little bit of a thought process to think about those, because that's too many things to go through, right? All right. All right, thank you.